Our next speaker is Saransh, and Saransh is speaking from IIT Mumbai, is speaking for the motion. Saransh.
Thanks, Arnab. I'd like to respond to Mr. Sanjay Jha. He quotes average growth figures of the UPA from 2004 and then goes on to blame external factors responsible for the global mess. If you want to take credit for your growth, you also have to accept responsibility when there's an economic slowdown.
Well,
In 1997, he said that 90% of the population was below the poverty line, and today 20% is below poverty line. The problem is that your policies are still living in 1997. They're still populist policies. You're not realizing the aspirations of the youth. You're not realizing that now what India needs is solid growth. And we need a growth to the tune of 9% if we really want to alleviate poverty further. Else our population will take over us and we won't be able to get people out of poverty. I would now like to respond to Abhig. He mentioned that there has been a global slowdown and India's economy is doing bad as well. The peak of the global slowdown was during 2008, and during that time, India was still achieving, in 2009, a growth rate of 7%. The problem has been that now it's around 4%. In such a short span of time, our economy has done really bad. And this is actually the time when the developed markets are in fact doing better. So this is clearly indicative of the fact that there has been a clear lack of government issue. The way they try to defend themselves is by saying, look at other emerging markets, they're equally performing badly. Even if you were to take emerging markets as a metric, India lies in the lowest quartile with respect to fiscal deficit, with respect to rupee depreciation. But the bigger point here is, why are we so complacent and benchmarking ourselves to the performance of the emerging market economy? What does an emerging market country mean? It means that investors want higher rate of return because there are substantial risks attached. Risks because there are corruption issues. Risks because there are clearance issues. Risks because there are uncertainties. By benchmarking ourselves to the emerging market standards, we are in effect saying that these are the stereotypes that apply to us and we have to be complacent and there is no way that we can get out of it.
good point.
The last point that he mentioned was about the whole oil economy, and I think Swapna he has already responded to it adequately. The challenge here is that even when there is a global slowdown, oil prices are around $100. That just means that there are more number of players in the global economy. And as a government, you need to rise up to the challenge. When the global marketplace is becoming more competitive, you need to establish regulations, rules, and procedures which allow our businesses to become competitive as well. And that cannot happen when people from the industry are saying, Kumar Mangalam Birla has said that $10 billion worth of projects are still under clearances and they're not getting approval. With that, I would like to rest my case.
Right. Thank you very much, Saransh. Speaking against the motion, defending the government, is Pawan Verma, representing the JDU perspective.
Not
Pawan.
necessarily, Arnab. And let me say, given the passions and the immediacy of emotions, it's not a very difficult proposition to oppose. But having said that, nor am I here to necessarily defend the track record of the UPA. I want to take this debate to another direction, which I think is equally important. We have castigated, the opposition has castigated global factors. I want to highlight an internal factor. And that, I believe, is that governance. What is governance? Governance is a consequence, a result, an outcome of a certain kind of polity. Now, for the last 20 years, we have all been witness to the fact that instead of having a government at the center with a stable majority which has 5 years to rule, and to give back to the people the fruits of governance for which they voted them in, you've had multi-party coalitions with perennially precarious majorities and constant instability. Now, in this situation, notwithstanding moments of high economic growth, to expect enduring governance is difficult because all energies go towards political management and survival. Governments almost live from day to day. They are caught constantly in the tussle of managing a coalition, each constituent of which can pull the government down. So all energies are going to political management and survival and not to governance. So the real cause is not governance. There is an antipathy in the system, and this needs to be followed very closely. And it cuts across all governments that may come to the center now or later, unless we tweak the system substantially. There is an antipathy that has developed between the functioning of democracy and the imperatives of governance. And in such situations, governments resort to populist measures. Populist measures and not enduring long-term foundational solutions to problems. Secondly, another factor happens. The opposition in parliament has been defined to be a partner with the government in the project of governance in the role of a responsible critic. But when the opposition sees the government perennially unstable and on the verge of falling, its character changes. Its character becomes predatory, one of opposing an issue not necessarily on the objective merits and demerits of the issue, but merely in order to embarrass the government and, if possible, nudge it towards the fall. All of these factors contribute to lack of governance. So as Chanakya said, go to the root cause. Think about it, because you may have periods because of a variety of collateral factors of good governance or high economic growth rates. But are we getting optimal governance in this country? No, because the root cause lies elsewhere. On a micro basis, talking of Bihar, I believe there needs to be, apart from any governance standards that you demand, there needs to be a restructuring of the relationship between center and states. States which have performed well. The way Bihar came up from nothing at all to having highest growth rates for 5 years in a row. But it cannot go beyond unless the center now allocates resources at more concessional rates, allows the incentives for private investment to come in. So you've brought the state up to a certain point, and you must have then the wherewithal to reward good performance, verifiably good performance by some measures of support, when you will see governance then acting out optimally. Last point I want to make, we all talk of governance purely in terms of statistics. But I want to put this point before this House. Don't judge governance only by that extra 1% of the GDP. Governance must be inclusive in character. Governance must go down to the people who matter. Yes, when GDP rates are very high, people are redeemed from below the poverty line. But there can be an equally valid approach that you work in governance in order to benefit the unprivileged, the deprived, and that may slow your growth rate down. They may deprive the affluent, the middle class, and the elite of some benefits, but ultimately, in the long term, they lay the foundations of a more progressive and prosperous India.
Well, thank you very much, Pawan Verma. We'll go into comments later. I don't know what coalition politics has to do with the retrospective tax proposal, and if coal and iron ore are in doldrums today, it's because they're in doldrums because of corruption. I think that the corruption is also fundamentally one of the issues. We will come to those points, and I think we should talk about the way the political class is dealing with the economic problem, because the frustration is with them. I hope you address that. Our next speaker speaking for the motion is Kiran Majumdar-Shaw. The floor is yours for 3 minutes.
Thanks, Arnab. First and foremost, I think you've skewed this debate because Pawan is on our side. So I think that's unfair. But, you know, to be less facetious, I just want to, you know, pick on a number of issues that have been raised during this very interesting debate. Firstly, I believe that certainly this is a case of lost opportunities because of poor governance and very, very poor policies taken in a timely manner. Now, on one side, when we look at our growth rate almost at the the height of the financial crisis globally, we prided ourselves that we were insulated from external factors, and we had that 8+% growth.
That's true.
Today, we have dropped below 5%, and now we are no longer insulated. We are now blaming it on external factors. So this blame game has to stop. We are doing this to ourselves. It is self-inflicted. Why? Because we certainly have a very poor governance system that is failing to deliver on every aspect of our economic growth opportunity. Whether it is our laws that are about industrial growth, agricultural growth, or whether it is simply about our social welfare schemes, let's face it, nothing delivers where it's supposed to. When you look at our industrial growth, we know that we have neglected the manufacturing sector. We know that our growth has been skewed because today we have 50% of our jobs coming from the agricultural sector, which is only contributing 15% to our GDP growth. How are we going to create real jobs? How are we going to take those jobs from the land to provide them with real jobs, not NREGA, okay? I think NREGA itself is not delivering on creating skills and real jobs. I mean, that is really a big, big issue for us. And that's wasted opportunities, wasted resources. If you look at the aspect of, other aspects of our economy, we certainly know that corruption is playing a very, very serious role, serious impact on economic development and economic growth. We know that none of our social welfare schemes are reaching the people and really helping them to address either hunger or illness or any of these issues because it is being pilfered away through corruption. And we have very poor delivery systems. So again, it's a case of bad governance. So if you look at it, on one side, Sanjay said that, we are the third largest in the world in terms of PPP. And yet, we have a food security bill that says that 70% of our people are hungry and poor. So where is this governance system that we are talking about, okay? This is where I think we really need to focus our efforts. We all know that we need strong delivery, good governance. We need very strong policies to be put into place to really look at what's going wrong with our economy. I don't want to repeat all the other facts that people have raised about why are we not an investment-friendly destination any longer. Why is it that we've lost our business competitiveness? Why is it that our license Raj has now become an approval Raj? Do you know that the transaction costs that industry faces in India today is amongst the highest in the world? I mean, we should be using technology to bring in transparency and accountability. But even that is not happening. So isn't there a total breakdown in our governance structure, in our delivery mechanisms? Let's not be in denial. And as long as we keep blaming external factors for our own follies, right, I think we are not going to see change. We are not going to see economic revival. That, to me, is really a very serious issue.
Well, I think you have a point, Kiran Majumdar. We are, as a nation, we are 132nd in the ease of doing business in the world. That's a very poor statistic, indeed. Our last speaker against the motion, and after this we are going into open debate, is Prakhar from the MS Ramaiah Institute of Technology. Prakhar.
So it's very easy to say that the problems that like the Fed existed before, there are problems that currently India faces also existed before, right? Like things like poor infrastructure, inadequate workforce, small manufacturing sector, and excessive regulation. However, at that time, India was booming. At that time, these problems were still existing, probably at a lesser level. This tells us that the current crisis that we're facing is not only because of the kind of problems that this country is facing inherently, but also the kind of problems that the government really has no control over. Mr. Dasgupta talked about India not being an attractive place to actually invest. And I agree. However, where I disagree is who's actually responsible for this, right? The Supreme Court is passing judgments on everything from GM trials and like unilaterally cancelling telecom licenses. How are we going to get investor trust if something like this is happening, right? FDI in retail is being passed and the opposition is opposing that. Bits like GST and FDI in insurance are not being paid in heed to, and opposition is disrupting the parliament. You cannot expect the government to actually pass proper laws on this. Now, speaking about global factors, right? Like, there's an ideological benchmark that has been set by these credit rating agencies like Standard & Poor's, right? They think that for a country to like run properly, you need to have a certain kind of CAD or a certain kind of FDI, etc., right? I tell you that although those ideological benchmarks are evident, but they're very myopic in nature. The investor is highly trusting those benchmarks, which is something that the government really has no control over. But those benchmarks do not apply to this country, and therefore the investor trust is lost, and so the investors are not investing in this country. Let me pick up something on what Abhik said, right? The idea of recovery of developed markets. There's a crisis that just like almost got over, maybe. Private consumer debt is reducing in that part. And therefore, in short term, portfolio investors will want to invest in less risk markets. No matter how much we have tried to diversify our international trade, US and Europe still remain the major trading partners. And therefore, what affects them will definitely affect us. And we cannot dispute that at all. So some good things that the government has actually done. They're trying to increase savings, right? And both. For us, for household people, they've introduced inflation index bonds. They're also trying to reduce distortionary subsidies on what the government gives, and therefore that increases capital. DMIC, right? A project that actually brings in 3 to 4% of growth in your GDP with 9 industrial zones, 3 ports, 6 airports, 6-lane expressways, and a 4,000 megawatt power plant. 2 days ago, they introduced a new drug policy, first time in 18 years. They're investing in welfare schemes. They're investing in long-term growth. What companies are doing are investing in short-term growth. When Tata had lots of money, they went and they bought JLR and Chorus, right? And today they're complaining about India not being an attractive place to be. Well, these businesses can't run purely based on government. It has to be a public-private partnership, and that needs to be understood. The FDI and insurance and pension funds that I talked about, BJP wants it capped at 26%, but the government wants to increase it at 49%. Why? Because FDI inflows will be more stable than the equity markets. And with the CAD at about 5% of the GDP, we think that this FDI will increase long-term capital and therefore the economy. So as Sir said here, that it is governance which is a problem, not really the government. And if, according to side proposition, good governance is scrapping off welfare schemes, I'm very proud to oppose on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Prakhar.